All right, good evening and welcome to our Wake County Public School System Board of Education meeting. And it's January 19th. I call this meeting to order at 5:37. We have a quorum with all board members here and present in the boardroom, along with Superintendent Kathy Moore. So everyone is here. So if you will stand with me and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for that, and we will move right into our information session and start with Superintendent's comments. Superintendent Moore.
Good evening. I am pleased to report that our substitute teacher recruitment campaign continues to attract potential candidates. More than 830 people have completed our online interest form, and nearly 400 have attended the past two virtual information sessions. To give you some perspective, in January 2020, we received 78 substitute teacher applications. So far this month, we have received 254. We remain hopeful that these trends will continue. As you know, increasing our pool of substitute teachers is a critical factor in our ability to return to in-person instruction. I am grateful to the members of our community who have responded to this call to serve our students. Anyone interested in learning more about becoming a substitute teacher is encouraged to register for the next virtual information session scheduled for this Thursday at 1 p.m. Go to wcpss.net/subs for more information. Congratulations to Julie Stivers of Mount Vernon Middle School, who has been named WCPSS School Library Media Coordinator of the Year. The award recognizes media coordinators who demonstrate high-quality leadership, instructional practice, technology integration, program administration, school culture development, and professional reflection. Michael Hokenberg, who was principal of Mount Vernon when Ms. Stivers was nominated, had this to say: "The transformation of the library program and the library space at Mount Vernon is solely a result of her tireless efforts to rethink best school library practices, to center everything entirely on what will make the most impact on her students, and to create an environment that not only welcomes them, but also nurtures them." Ms. Stivers helps students develop and present a program called the 5 Key Foundations for Building Inclusive Libraries. She also organized free book fairs and helps student writers in the WCPSS Summer Writing Institute. Stivers, who has worked at Mount Vernon since 2015, has served as the chair of the school improvement team and has led professional development and learning on equity. Clearly, Ms. Stivers is a worthy recipient of this honor. Congratulations to her, as well as this year's other finalists: Angela Headley of A.B. Combs Magnet Elementary, Christine Zaccardi of Fox Road Magnet Elementary, and Heather Fields of Wake Forest High School. I feel like I need trumpets. The 8th annual Wake Up and Read book drive kicks off this Saturday with a Facebook Live event from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Wake Up and Read to date has collected hundreds of thousands of books for schools in Wake County with the highest need. These books are given to students to help combat summer learning loss so they're ready to continue learning when the new school year begins. The pandemic has brought unprecedented challenges with long-term impacts on student learning. That's why this year's Wake Up and Read goal is the most ambitious ever. We are aiming to collect 200,000 new and gently read books to be distributed to partner schools. The drive begins this Saturday and runs through February 28th. Please consider joining Wake Up and Read in building home libraries to ensure every child in Wake County is inspired and empowered to read. Go to wakeupandread.org to learn more about how to get involved. Finally, I would like to recognize the finalists for this year's Diane Kent Parker First Year Teacher Awards. Every year, our district honors a group of outstanding teachers from elementary schools, secondary schools, and special education. These teachers are recognized for navigating the challenges of a new job with grace, skill, and confidence. They serve as models for their colleagues and inspiration for their students. The selection committee has named 16 finalists. There will be one winner chosen from each of these 4 categories. Congratulations to the following finalists. Elementary school teachers: Sally Allen of Hunter Magnet Elementary, Anna Jones of A.B. Combs Magnet Elementary, Kaylee Scott of Baucom Elementary, and Jenna Tymoody of Harris Creek Elementary. Middle school teachers: Zoe Grove of Westlake Middle, Walla Kider of West Cary Middle, Summer Thompson of Apex Friendship Middle, and Allison Weatherspoon of Alston Ridge Middle. High school teachers: Annalise Boaz of Green Level High, Emily Holodak of South Garner High, Shay Luke of Apex High, and Angelo Pettis of Sanderson High. And special education teachers: Valerie Aarons of Green Hope Elementary, Bria Pepiat of Wake Forest Middle, Jessica Rogers of Harris Creek Elementary, and Rachel Smith of Rollsville High School. Our third core belief states, well-supported and highly effective dedicated teachers are essential to success for all students. These outstanding young teachers represent the very best of the next generation of educators. I applaud them for their commitment to their profession and to their students. That concludes my comments.
Thank you for those comments, Superintendent Moore. I'll be brief with my comments as well. Just a couple of things to note. One, District 4 is having our first BAC meeting of this year. That will be this Thursday, January 21st, and that will be virtually, and that meeting will be held at 12 noon. So again, District 4 BAC this Thursday at 12 p.m. That meeting will be held virtually. Second, just wanted to, and I thought it was very fitting that we had a presentation from the Chamber this afternoon, just being the date after the date in which we observe the Martin Luther King holiday. And just fitting, and always think about each year as we celebrate the work and life of Dr. Martin Luther King, think about one of his seminal works, From Chaos to Community, Where Do We Go From Here? And it just reminds me, and I think reminds us all, about where we are as a country and as a nation, and what we saw in our nation's capital the other week, and the chaos around that, and then ensued after that. And so just thinking about, again, the need for us to get to community. And so appreciate the work that the Chamber is doing, and that the role that we can play as a system and as a board to help try to move our community to just that, a true sense of community. So I hope all of you spent some time yesterday, even though we are in a pandemic, thinking about and reflecting how we might be able to do that work and celebrate the life of Dr. King. And in that note, too, that all of you, and particularly our students, staff, employees, over the next few days, with the emergency movement around the Capitol, and the things that are we are being asked to be aware of, that we all be safe and travel safely, that you may even decide to stay in your homes and be safe over the next couple of days. But I know that we are, I think, taking some steps at some of our schools in the downtown area near the Capitol to take some extra precautions so that our students, faculty, and employees are safe, though we are home. That most folks are home and virtual learning. But I just encourage all of you all, especially our Wake County Public Schools family, to be safe over the next few days. And last but not least, I want to take a moment and lift up the name and life also of one of our employees. Back in September of 2019, we recognized during one of our employee spotlights a teacher at Phillips, Ms. Eloise Hilliard, who was a grad point teacher at Phillips High School. And if you recall, I'm just going to read a few sentences from the recognition that we provided her at our spotlight back in September of 2019. Ms. Hilliard, Eloise Hilliard, is often one of the first staff members to arrive each day at our school at 7 a.m. Always with a smile on her face, our staff and students absolutely love her. She is the epitome of a professional with a positive attitude. At the age of 89, she commutes daily to our school from Clayton. She is, in fact, the oldest teacher in WCPSS, and yet she daily displays an abundance of energy and positivity. And I remember taking a picture with her and was proud to display that picture on my Facebook page that time, and so many people reached out and said, I remember her. She was my teacher, that they remember her. Well, Ms. Hilliard passed last Tuesday, at the age of 90. And while Phillips and all of our high schools were obviously in virtual learning, she was not in the building, but at the time still was our oldest employee at 90. I was not able to confirm if she was our oldest serving employee, but she was certainly at 90 years old our oldest employee. So just wanted to lift up the name of Eloise Hilliard and ask for prayers and blessings for her and her family, and just take a moment of silence at this time. So again, thank you for that. Our thoughts and prayers are with the family of Mrs. Eloise Hilliard, who passed away at 90, Phillips high school teacher. With that, I'll pass it on to Mrs. Mahaffey, Vice Chair Mahaffey, for any comments.
Thank you, Chair Sutton, and thank you for sharing those words about Ms. Hilliard. I know many of us went to Phillips' last in-person graduation, and she was present, and we got to see how her students really kind of flocked around her and her energy at that time. District 8 held their Board Advisory Council meeting last Monday. I'd like to thank, from the Magnet office, Tamani Anderson-Powell, who talked about the priorities and goals of the Magnet office. Glenn Croza from Student Assignment talking about future schools in District 8 and what we've done as a district to help provide transparency and what's with their future schools website and what we can expect in the CIP coming up. And also Mark Winters from our finance department talking about the structure of a budget in North Carolina and how different that is from other states, and specifically where we get our funding sources from in Wake County, and certainly discussion leading to what this unprecedented year may bring with that. And I'd like to thank the parents, administrators, and community members that make up the District 8 Board Advisory Council for their continued engagement in BAC in this virtual space. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. Dr. Martin, I'll start with you.
Thank you. I took my comments brief. As always, I want to say thank you to all of our teachers and staff, students and parents. We all know the hard work that virtual instruction is, and thank you for engaging in that and everybody's work to try to continue to keep the community safe. We all have lots of work to do working together. I, too, want to recognize the importance of yesterday's holiday, recognizing Martin Luther King. Everybody remembers the I Have a Dream speech, and I, among other things, so respect Dr. King's work calling for focus on education, because I think he recognized the role of education in actually needing to transform our community and our culture. I don't have the exact quote, but it has stuck with me. He noted that integrating things like buses and lunch counters and movie theaters and water fountains was the easy work. And he highlighted that, he said, wait till you get to funding
public education for all students. That's where the real work comes. It's not an exact quote, but that's the essence of one of his quotes that has just really struck with me. And I think, we heard from Donya Perry with the Greater Raleigh Chamber of Commerce in Wake County. Our work with RTI, our work with our strategic plan, doing that hard work, that systemic structural work to make sure that we have high quality education for every child is the legacy that is going to fulfill the dream of Dr. King and the dream of many of us. So we'll keep on doing that hard work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Ms. Kushner.
Thank you. Good evening to all. I wanted to thank everyone who came to the District 6 Board Advisory Council last week. We had a great discussion about academic issues in remote learning and hybrid learning, and then looking forward. So thanks to Drew Cook, Michelle Woodson, and Alicia Miller from the academics team, as well as Marlo Gaddis for making the magic all happen virtually last week, and to all who attended. Also want to wish best wishes for the start of second semester for most of our students tomorrow. It's not what we envisioned, but like half of all public school students in North Carolina who are remaining remote through the end of this month and beyond, we're struggling with these issues, and appreciate the input, conflicting, varied, and broad-ranging, but know that we're working to take in all that input and make the best decisions possible. Thank you, Chair Sutton.
Thank you, Ms. Kushner. Mr. Hagerty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honestly, nothing new to add. I convey as well my appreciation and thanks to everyone who's working hard to deliver educational services in our community and everyone who's working to keep everyone safe. I especially appreciate everyone that's out there getting vaccinated and helping to reduce our COVID rates. So thank you.
Thanks, sir. Ms. Carter.
Thank you, Chairman Sutton. I just want to thank everyone for reaching out, sharing your concerns and thoughts about all the discussions that we've been having. And just want to admit that some of the emails are difficult to read when families are sharing their specific struggles for their families and their students. Please know that we hear you, and we are doing our best to read everything that comes in. I'd also like to just show my appreciation for all the community members who attended the first D9 Connection virtual meeting I had last week. Just a very informal time for me just to listen to whatever you all would like to tell me. So I appreciate that. And wanted to make everyone aware that the first Board Advisory Council for District 9 will be Thursday, January 28th at 5:30. And those invitations will be going out later this week. So, and thank you, as always, to all of our staff doing everything that they continue to do and showing up for our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Carter. Mrs. Cash.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. I do want to thank everybody for emails, all people that emailed different sides of the opinions, but also the thoughts and the things that they're sharing with us as far as experiences. It's very helpful, and hopefully that we can take all of this and try to do something better with it. So I appreciate that. Also very sad about the untimely deaths that had happened to Martin Luther King, and I would have loved to see how different we would be today if he'd been alive. I think things would have been so much better. Of course, we all know that. And again, I just hope that we can do some good things for kids. That's it.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Yes, thank you. And again, hopefully everyone who had a few days off were able to rest and restore. It's only the third full week of January, and it's already been a very long month, so I certainly hope people took the time to rest and restore. And while yesterday was the day that we celebrated a day of service, I made the comment to people that for many of us who spend our life committed to service, I certainly hope that those who don't necessarily do that took the time to not just reflect on his past speeches, his most famous words, but really thought about what it would mean to them as a reflection point to how we really move forward. And for me, again, as a school board member, reminding people that one thing he was certain of is education was an equalizer for all communities, especially Black and brown communities. And so I certainly hope people who listen to us also remember that as you reflect on how to be of service and actually actualize his dream, that stabilizing and equalizing our education and ensuring and supporting an equity framework is a great place for those who join Wake County Public Schools by viewing our meetings and providing us feedback that that's an inflection point for all of us to consider how do we do that, especially in this day and age where things are not as though they were. But I know for certain that in order to actualize the dream, education will always, in my opinion, be a pillar of strength, and we get to choose how we actually move that forward. So I will encourage everyone to spend the next 300 and plus days not just talking about it, but actually being about it and being committed to Wake County Public Schools. And certainly all of your emails and comments with your diverse and divergent opinions feed into that, but I certainly hope whether you agree or disagree with me, with the broader board decisions, that won't change the way that you engage in public education and still see it as a place of equalizing for all of our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson-Hosler. And Mrs. Scott.
I would just like to replay what Ms. Johnson-Hosler just shared, especially that last remark that is just so important during this time, because we do have so many different experiences and different backgrounds and virtual learning and in-person learning and living life in a pandemic. It absolutely impacts everybody in unique and varied ways, and we certainly do our best to reach people where they are always, and it's especially important now. I wanted to take a second to thank all of our community partners who continue to work on providing much needed food, produce, clothing to all of our families and children in need. I'm really optimistic to see Backpack Buddies has been slowly getting back into providing that shelf-stable food to our children, and that's such an important part of addressing food security with our students. And as we do continue to look for service, let us be reminded that there has been progress. But if you look at the asks from 1963, the March on Washington, too many of those asks have not yet been fulfilled. And so as we look to ways we can serve our community, we have amazing partners in groups like Activate Good who can help steer you in the direction that works for your, that helps you with the time and the gifts and the talents of each individual person in different ways that call to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Scott. I want to again thank all board members for your comments and your thoughts, as well as the superintendent. Yeah, moving to approval of the meeting agenda. I have one change to the agenda, and that is item 5A under communications, YMCA of the Triangle Association Resource Center. I would like to move that item to action. And with that, if I could entertain a motion to approve tonight's agenda with that correction or amendment.
Thank you for making that adjustment, Chair Sutton. I'd like to move approval of the agenda as amended.
Second?
Second.
I got no problem. Got a motion and a second to approve tonight's agenda with that said correction or amendment. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor show by a sign of aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Ayes have it. The amended agenda is approved. That takes us to public comment portion of our agenda. Residents wishing to address the Wake County Board of Education may submit their comments or video by noon the day of the meeting. That can be done at the link found at our website, www.wcpss.net. The following citizens have submitted comments as part of our public comment portion of the agenda. Their comments are linked on the same online agenda that we are using for tonight's meeting. That agenda, as well as guidelines for those wishing to submit comments for future meetings, also can be found on our district website. We have 53 written comments from members of the public, as I've done in the past, because we don't have accommodations here in our boardroom, that those, again, written comments are there on the website, but I will read the topics and speakers whose comments are attached to the agenda. Again, with 53, I won't read each one individually, but just give you a number or a sense of the number of speakers and the topic areas. On remote versus in-person instruction, there are 11 speakers on that topic. On the topic of school resource officers and the Peace Builders program, there are 30 speakers on that topic. On special education, there are 6 speakers, and then the remaining 6 speakers are on a variety of topics that include pandemic support for teenagers, policy changes regarding transracial identity, school counselors, cumulative folders, one on MTSS, and one a public statement about the attack on the U.S. Capitol. So those are the 53 written comments that have been submitted for tonight's public comment section of our agenda. That now takes us to our one information item, and that is the superintendent's update. This is on second semester updates. So we've changed that title just a little bit. And so this Superintendent Moore provides us an update regarding our second semester of the current year. So Superintendent Moore, I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening. Primarily, I'll focus my comments on a lot of the questions and requests that came up as part of the meeting last week that we had on Thursday. Do want to thank our guests that came earlier today to the work session from the ABC Science Collaborative, Dr. Benjamin, and then the folks from our county, Wake County government, who came to speak about vaccinations and the process and the priorities and the numbers that they are looking at as well. From follow-up from last week, there were several comments and questions that were asked during the work session, in particular about how the district can engage from the district level in perhaps gathering some additional information from staff or families regarding the return to in-person and second semester. We just want to make sure, as staff is looking at these requests, that we are building a bridge to a return to in-person with the questions that we ask and the information that we gather. There was also a number of questions asked about attendance data or engagement, and sometimes those two were conflated. So we're going to probably start, if we can get it ready for next week in policy committee, to first review the changes that were made for how we take attendance based on what we've had with remote instruction and the impact of the pandemic, and then talk a little bit about what the structures are that are in place. We reviewed those with the board back in the fall, but think it bears some updating at this point, and then begin to then provide you and follow up with what we're actually seeing in Power School, which teachers went from 2 possible options for attendance to 4 possible options for attendance, and what that means. And I think in particular there were questions about the differences that we might be seeing disaggregated by either just those that have not chosen virtual academy, and in particular those students and what we're seeing during remote weeks versus in-person weeks and that sort of thing. So that will be the part of the focus as we come bringing that forward. There were also several questions about updating the grades conversation that we also had at the end of first quarter, when we provided the board with information about what we were seeing with regards to failure rates across levels and in the district at the end of first quarter. Second quarter just ended last week, so schools are now in the process of inputting that data, and so we will bring that data to the board as we get it, and you will note that it's different kinds of data. The second quarter failures is one thing, and that would be like for year-long courses, which you see basically K-8. In high schools, we will actually have final course data for those schools that have semester courses. So that will be coming, and schools are in the process right now of finalizing that data. There's another question that came up a couple of times was how we could capture data around dropouts or folks who are no longer engaged with the district. And I'm going to change that a little bit because the dropout is a technical term and it is a lagging indicator for the district. And what that means is that it's a year afterwards when you get that data. Right? The most recent dropout data that we have is 18-19 data, the report for 18-19. The report for 1920, the dropout data report for 1920, will be available. The state board finishes, we do our work in the fall, early December-ish. They finish their review, and it becomes official on March 1st. But that's for 1920, right? So for 2021, staff is looking at what are the data points that we can look at. Is there something in withdrawals? When students withdraw from the district. In terms of what we know about what they're doing next. So that's something that we're doing mid-year. That's not really how we gather dropout data, but it is the impact. I think it is the information that the board wants to know is what are students doing now if they've left the system and we know what they've done. So how do we capture that? There were also several questions from a couple of board members about wanting to ensure that we can provide information not just to the board but to our families, in particular those who have students who are identified as special needs, who have IEPs, about the processes and the structures and the access to meetings and reviews and that sort of thing as we move forward during this period that we are back in remote. And then there was also some desire from several board members about how we perhaps take those three categories that we're looking at around how we are looking at our return to in-person instruction and provide a visual as opposed to just narrative around them so that we can sort of track that progress. And this would be things like the three things that we've talked about: state and NCDHHS guidance and restrictions that are coming out of the governor's office or DHHS, the state and county level data, and district indicators. And is there a way to provide that in a graphic format as opposed to a narrative format? And then, continue to bring all of the information that we can on vaccine updates and access for that to our staff. And all of these really with an eye towards how soon can we return to in-person instruction safely? When are we ready to do that? And that is, I believe, what you've tasked us with. So I wanted to just provide you an update on all of those things. If there's something missing that I didn't catch, please let me know. But I think it's subsumed in most of that. Those are my updates.
All right. Thank you, Superintendent Moore, for those updates, and appreciate you capturing those things from our most recent meeting on last Thursday and addressing them in a so quickly and timely manner. Mrs. Cash, I see a couple of hands.
Just a question. Is this a good time to ask her a question about the things that she just went through on data? So clarification of when would we be getting, so you and I spoke earlier about the information I needed or was looking for was children that were in person and engaged, but when remote were no longer engaged, so it wouldn't be the virtual academy, I guess. Did you say we would be getting that information?
What staff is going to have to look at there is if attendance is the proxy for that, is there a difference in the attendance of students who are attending in-person face-to-face weeks versus their remote weeks for those that are on rotations or the period of time that the district was in rotations? Yes, that's what we're looking at pulling.
So that won't take very long, right?
Well, Power School is an interesting product, and so we will pull it and see what it looks like, and then we have to determine if it's. We'll share what we have. We're trying to get it from central services databases versus having to reach into schools because that would take much longer.
Okay.
Mrs. Carter.
Thank you. I just have a few questions, I guess. I wanted clarification. Are we going to be surveying families as well?
I think that it would be helpful to get feedback from the board on the types of things that you would want our families to have an opportunity to respond to.
Okay.
Again, towards the eye of what staff is discussing now is what is the information or feedback that we need that builds that runway for a return to in-person.
Okay. All right. All right, so are we discussing that now, later? Like, because I'm just trying to get a time frame for, because I think the quicker we can get this information and get it together, we have, we'll have a bigger picture of what we're looking at. So,
It's up to you.
I mean, is
Send
that,
over.
So Tim,
because I guess I'm kind of, I hear the update, but I hear, we're not getting the information right now, and I understand it's being gathered. And then specifically in regards to the survey to families, if they're needing feedback on what we're looking for, are we going to give that tonight, or is that going to be, when are we looking at doing that? Because again, I'm about, expediting this process and getting the ball rolling.
are you interested in, you're saying survey all of our parents? Are you looking for input from families about our decision to open schools? And I'm trying to help understand what.
Well, I had a couple other questions. I can get into that, but I had other questions as well. But for myself, I can only speak to what I was looking for. Some of it was in response to what was brought up at the last board meeting, and that there had been a change of families willing to come in person, right? I believe you had mentioned that, Superintendent Moore. So I think just for me, providing the, information directly from our families. What are we looking at if families are, as far as I know, the VA window has closed, but if you have been receiving volumes of emails stating, well, I'm not sending my students, then this is something we need to address, and what families are looking for. If that that's a general, but just a general idea. Yeah.
And for
Yeah.
that particular
Sure.
item, what we've talked about in the leadership team is how do we gather input from the families formally who are requesting a change about the reason for why they are requesting that change. The primary changes that we're seeing are requests for families who want to remain in virtual academy, who may have been there first semester and opted for plan A, B, or C, whatever the district would be in when we returned, or families that were in plan A, B, or C first semester that are now requesting virtual for second after the deadline. So we will have a report, should be ready before the end of the week, that's disaggregated by school of the choices that families have made thus far. Just like we did first semester, we'll send that to you for second semester. But the question now is, how do we capture information on the requests that families are making and why at this point? So that is something that we have talked about doing.
Okay. And I guess the other questions I had were, you had mentioned attendance and having 4 options in Power School. Do those 4 options reflect how the student is engaging with the change in the attendance policy? Like, are they doing two-way communication? Are they showing up for a Google Meet? Are they, what was the other option? Are they in person? Or turning in work? Or are those not captured currently in Power School? I guess,
Yeah.
all of those, so that we have a clear picture of, if there's a student that's not showed up at all for a Google Meet and consistently relied on two-way communication as their primary means of attendance. So just some clarification maybe around that, so
Right.
the public even could understand. I'd appreciate it.
The 4 options that are available are in-person present, in-person absent, remote learning present, remote learning absent.
Okay, so.
And so whether you are virtual academy or remote, it's just one of those two, right? And this is part of what we would cover, that we covered first quarter with the board around the changes to how we take attendance, that we wanted to revisit next week. What those options are and what the impact that is having on how teachers take attendance and the processes that they follow. They have some choices, teachers, individual classroom teachers, about when they take attendance and how they take attendance. There was some guidance that was provided early on in the school year about ensuring that a student wasn't marked absent only because they didn't show up to the Google Meet, but that if there was work assigned, because there may be barriers to the student joining the Google Meet, but that should engage, that the teacher should engage and follow up with the student to determine what happened, to see if the work that was assigned during that period of time was actually done, in which case the student would be counted present, not absent. So, and that is each teacher in the school district is implementing that. And so we can pull the data from PowerSchool, but it's that particular level of how they are making that decision. It's going to have to be driven down to the school level to get some more data, and that will take longer.
Okay. All right, yeah, because I guess for me, I think that, knowing specifics like that is very important for us moving forward about possible impacts on students and their education. I did have questions about, like if school social workers are still doing any in-person visits or follow-ups, if there's any red flags or, attendance concerns, that kind of thing. Do you know?
I'm sure they are. The school
At this
social workers
point?
are still engaged. I don't know if Paul Coe is online and can provide any more information. If not, we need to follow up specifically.
Okay.
But I'm certain that they are still engaging. Don't know if they're doing home visits or not.
Okay. Okay.
Superintendent Moore and Ms. Carter, I can actually add to that. So along with the social worker work, where there's the due diligence process we reviewed earlier in the year of, it's at the start of the year, we make sure our kids who have not come in and enrolled are found or sought out from previous, records from a previous school or through phone numbers and contacts. So that process continues. I would say that we found the vast majority of our students, but any kids who has not engaged in school, our social workers are continuing to do the work to figure out what's going on and find out and get confirmation that have they transferred to a different district due to housing needs or whatever has happened, to take record of those. And also with the CARES Act, we've hired community liaisons who logged about 1,600 hours between October and December of 2020, and they're the folks who will go do and continue to do home visits as needed as schools make referrals for specific students who have needs, or we are having a hard time connecting with them, so we ask our community liaisons to go out and visit the homes to find out more information.
Thank you for that. That is very helpful to know. And I think it helps. I've had a lot of questions from the public as well around that, so thank you. And my last thing is there a deadline for when we'll be receiving an update for the special education impact? I know you had brought up it's going to be looked at. Is there a time frame we're looking at possibly getting an update on that?
I think that you should get that in the next, I think you already got an email this morning about some things that we're resuming next week.
Yes.
But if there was more in that wasn't answered by that email, you should get that before the end of the week.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Mr. Hagerty.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that and some other questions about the report, I do think that there is a good opportunity that we can get some good constructive feedback from parents in the district and from staff. If you remember this summer, we had a very extensive public outreach. We all held community forums, had thousands of people register and attend. We had the Let's Talk app. We collected a lot of survey that went in, I think, and made a real difference between what we did in the spring versus what we were able to do in the fall. But the fact that we have 100% of our students now going back into either remote or virtual academy, and then even when they come back, about half the kids will still be in virtual academy, it's worth, I think, the time to get more parent feedback about that experience. So I think there's constructive things we can do in terms of, asking for feedback about grading, about attendance, about hours of instruction, about how the asynchronous days work. An opportunity to talk about health concerns either from going to school or not going to school. Are they worried about risks of infection? Are they worried about risks from isolation? And I don't presume to know, is that a survey? Is it reopening the Let's Talk app? But there could be a good opportunity here to sort of take measure of what we've been able to do so far and get some good feedback. And I think that's equally important of our teachers and our other school staff outside of the certified teachers. We get a lot of feedback about challenges, but this is a good chance to ask about issues of technology that they've used, what's worked and what hasn't, what they see in terms of level of engagement. Attendance might be more objective, but engagement is more subjective, right? And being able to hear directly from school staff about that engagement is maybe something that we could do that could be informative, even if we can't scientifically prove something. Compliance with safety protocols or comfort with the work environment. What are the real drivers? What are the real stressors? We've seen some good feedback so far, but being able to get that in an official public document might be good. So those are just some suggestions, asking for input about,
Right.
You've heard this idea of surveys, but what would they look like? How could you make them constructive? Those are some things I'd just
I think that
suggest.
was a thought exchange that we did in the fall.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And if other folks have similar ideas, just to share them with staff.
And those are things that we're talking about right now.
Okay. Thank you.
And is it realistic to expect that something like that could be done and we could get that feedback within, because I'm assuming you're talking about doing this pause between now and mid-February, that we're able to do some feedback survey, what have you?
I'd like to see it sooner rather than later, but I don't have any illusions as to how long it would take, so I don't have a deadline. But I think it's important work that we need.
No, I mean, agreed. We would want to figure that out really before the end of this week, what that looks like, in order to at least have some preliminary data 2 weeks later when we come back to our next board meeting, if possible.
And at the very least, I guess they could either share that with the district or with their respective schools or principals, and then they might coalesce that in some way and try it back. Okay. Dr. Martin?
Thank you. And Superintendent Moore, thank you for the list of the summary of things. I agree with and think that information will be very helpful. As you collect that information, I'd like to request that, to what extent possible, we can understand some of it disaggregated. Possibly, I mean, some of it suggested by zip code, possibly by, a couple years ago we started looking at the economic health index of schools. Part of our challenge is, when we get district-wide data, what's that telling us? Because we have, as we saw from that analysis, just vastly different schools. So if we could see some of the information a little bit disaggregated, I think that would be extremely helpful. We hear a lot of people making arguments based on, to use some of their language, marginalized and low-income populations. Information we often hear in those emails is not the same information as at least I'm hearing from leaders in those very communities. I think many leaders in the communities have expressed to me concern about access to health care, for example, shaping their recommendations and whatnot. So I guess being intentional to look at the information, being intentional to get voices from people who might not normally just respond to a survey and give us, their opinions on things. I think we need to, there are communities that we need to reach out to make sure we're hearing from them rather than just, taking the general survey. But we can look at our own data at some of that disaggregation. So to what extent we can do any disaggregation, that would be extremely helpful. Thank you.
Ms. Kushner?
Thank you, Chair Sutton. And I'd like to raise a question for Superintendent Moore. If there are any policy changes we need to look at under our graduation requirements, given the pandemic has disrupted, particularly our high school students. Are there waivers we need to give, timing, acceleration, so that we can keep our students on track to graduate? Because that is one significant concern given the disruption from this year. So are there some policy changes or things we can do to accelerate, give some students more time, allow some students more grace for graduation requirements?
I don't think that the state will change their timeline. We still have to report by June 30th in order for kids to count one way or another.
Yeah, we don't govern alone, do we? We have to rely on the state and federal.
However, I do believe that we did take some steps last year at the end of the school year that we have looked at again for this school year, and I don't know if Edward or Drew are on that can provide us a reminder of when we've discussed that and where we are now. Or Paul.
Drew, I think you're on mute.
Okay, who is it? So who's? Go ahead.
I think Drew is trying to chime in. I'm not sure, maybe having technical difficulties, but we did talk about that information earlier the year, and there we can also do a review of that policy when we come back to policy. Maybe for attendance, we can share what the policy is and what exceptions high school principals can make around graduation and the circumstances. But it is something that we have also discussed around really the impact of COVID-19 in multiple areas. And so over the next couple of weeks, around the February 2nd, the February 9th work sessions, there are several big topics that we want to bring, obviously around some changes that we may want to alter policy for this particular year, and share some of that with you. So there are multiple areas other than just graduation.
Thank you.
Mrs. Cash.
So as we're looking for information, it's always I'm always surprised at how we're trying to gather this information. So like in the spirit of trying to get our schools back in as quickly as possible, would it not be real important for us to actually know the virtual academy, the number of kids that are actually wanting to now go to virtual academy? It seems like that would be to our benefit to let more of them go to lower our numbers for in-person learning, or does that just seem too simplistic to me?
We have communicated to principals to engage families who have concerns that are interested in, after the deadline, moving to virtual academy from plan A, B, or C, whatever the district is in. Our principals have exercised a great deal of flexibility already with those families, and every time we talk about it, I'll get another email or two from someone that I then forwarded to the area superintendent to work with the principal on. But principals are moving. They have to look at their resources, they have to look at their personnel, but they understand why that is something that helps us with regards to the return to in-person.
Okay, thank you. Also in the spirit of trying to get this open, when we talked last week about, and Mr. Haggerty, you did a good job of talking about the letter from the Division of Principals. I actually thought there was a survey by the Division of Principals, and Superintendent Moore, you've told me there was not a survey by the division. They just said that was what they felt was what the principals wanted. So my concern is that after hearing from some people that K-5 to our elementary principals was something that they did have a problem with, but they did not necessarily have a problem with K-3 coming back. So the fact that the Division of Principals was not actually responding to us from a survey of all the principals is a little concerning to me, because I think we made a decision thinking they had asked that question. They hadn't asked, even if they had asked the question, well, all K-5, are you comfortable with all K-5 coming back? They didn't ask the question, are you comfortable with K-3 still coming back because the class size being smaller and 4 or 5 in rotation? But I think that's still leaving a lot of the information out in conclusions. I don't feel like we got good information on that.
I think so the division sent a letter with their recommendations as the leadership board that represents principals and assistant principals in the district. So that doesn't mean that every principal and assistant principal in the district provided feedback or agrees with that. But they sent it as the representative body that speaks for principals and assistant principals in Wake County. They did provide a recommendation across all grade levels. When our area superintendents gathered information from principals specifically about the grades 4-5, they did not gather information about K-3 because what we had agreed upon at the prior board meeting was to look at grades 4-5. We are now asking them to go back and disaggregate that feedback more specifically so that as the board moves forward at looking at how we get back into in-person instruction, if we want and need to make a distinction between K-3 and or 4-5, that we have that information. So
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mrs. Scott?
I had a question, and Superintendent Moore, I apologize for not asking this last week, but when I did ask about if staff would be required to go to buildings and they're extended the option to stay at home, are we hearing any feedback about staff members who are, that is not having the option for the FAST program is impacting them in a negative way?
I think AJ is on, and I think he sent something out in some messaging today to schools about this. And you're asking specifically about staff members who may want to continue to telework or not during this period that we are in remote for all students?
I'm sorry, no. Asking more if there are any educator staff members with their own children at home, and this is impacting their ability to teach their students, because previously they had been able to utilize the FAST program.
Sure, I'm at the FAST program. Okay,
That's right.
Okay. So I don't know if that's actually Tim who may have some.
And I understand the complexities of starting that program to begin with, and certainly to start it up again. But I was just curious how much feedback or what other resources, considerations, suggestions.
And I'll have to follow up with staff. I'm not sure that we've received a lot of feedback at this point from families about that, but we'll check and see.
Thank you.
Superintendent Moore, I think that's probably that's a good way to put it, is there's been some, Ms. Scott, but there's been very limited response in these first few weeks of January regarding FAST. So I know that topic will come back up among leadership as early as this week, maybe tomorrow.
That's right.
But I don't, but it would be accurate to say that it's been very limited, the response we've received to date. I don't want to say that I know this, but so it would appear that the telecommuting is serving the purpose intended. I guess I'd put it that way.
Absolutely, and that's very complex. I certainly understand that. I just I know that's a real issue for some of our teachers. Thank you.
Ms. Johnson-Hoskins.
Just one addition going back to, I think it was Mr. Haggerty earlier, comments, and I appreciate it. I had not thought about going back to using the thought exchange or let's talk. But I do want to iterate, and I know several of us have talked about this, and I don't think this is due in the next 2 weeks necessarily, but I do think that it's going to be important when we start having conversation with educators that we do it in a forum that they also feel comfortable with sharing and exchange. Because oftentimes we'll do things through a school, through a PLT, and then get one perspective, which doesn't really allow people who aren't in leadership to necessarily hear their opinions come through. So I would recommend like key informant interviews or small focus groups to gather some of that information that's already been mentioned. But I certainly would also like to start hearing from them about thoughts about lessons learned as we try to move forward, as we keep saying the genie's out of the bottle. So what does this look like forward? going forward so that we can start to capture some of the lessons that they've learned. Like, in order to really execute this, I need, in my own house, I'm watching my husband use like 2 iPads and 2 laptops to create a full visual for him to write so students can see. So those are the types of things that I think our academics team needs to start hearing, is some of that innovation, so that we're capturing ways that educators can say, here are ways that we were able to engage students, or here are ways that we weren't able to engage them. Because I think many of us are thinking through, okay, what does this look like to, and the whole country is looking, how do we take stock of and address this year of major transition and change for students? And for some, there's been gains, but for others, there's been loss. And I certainly know, we've talked about this before, a lot of our students from most marginalized communities have the most fear, so they haven't been in our buildings and they have been remote. So do we know if we still are talking about a gap in learning and growth and proficiency, or have we seen gains? And I guess I'm not really looking for a state test to tell me that. I'm more interested in what our educators' feedback would be from what they are witnessing with their students. So we'll get it on a test, but I'd much rather, those are things I'd like to hear from our educators that they've learned.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. Johnson-Hoster. Any other questions, thoughts from board members in regards to Superintendent Moore's comments? All right, thank you for those updates, Superintendent Moore. That brings us to our consent agenda. So if I can entertain a motion to approve tonight's consent items as they've been amended.
Motion to approve our consent agenda.
Got a motion from Ms. Johnson-Hoster, second from Ms. Kushner to approve tonight's consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor show by a sign of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Tonight's consent items are approved. Consent agenda is approved. That takes us to our action item, the portion of the agenda. First item is from our HR department, Dr. Matillo, bringing forward a recommendation to extend FFCRA leave.
Yes, thank you, Chair Sutton, members of the board, Superintendent Moore, good evening. I'm bringing this item to you for consideration of extending the leave provisions of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, or for the rest of this presentation known as FFCRA. Since early April, employers have been required to make available to employees 8 hours of paid sick leave when an employee has to miss work 80 hours of paid sick leave when an employee has to miss work for a COVID-related reason, which could include caring for a family member who is subject to a quarantine or isolation order, or who's been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine related to COVID-19. So in general, when that leave is related to the employee, the leave is at the employee's regular rate of pay. When the leave is for someone for whom the employee is caring, the leave is generally at 2/3 the employee's regular rate of pay. The district had elected to allow employees to request to apply accrued sick leave or annual leave to supplement FFCRA where eligible, so that the 2/3 could become full pay with that supplemented leave. FFCRA also provides up to 12 weeks of expanded family and medical leave at 2/3 the employee's regular rate of pay when an employee is unable to work due to a need for leave to care for a child whose school or child care provider is closed or unavailable for reasons related to COVID. The requirement that employers offer this FFCRA leave expired on December 31st. At the beginning of the year, we were informed that employers now have the option to extend some or all of the provisions of FFCRA through March 31st, 2021 for employees who had not already exhausted this leave. So it's not new leave for employees who had already used it. For those who have not, it was still available to them. So we have been reviewing this option for the district. The cost of extending this leave would already be covered within the funding source for salary and benefits. And after we've reviewed, we do believe it's in the best interest of our employees to extend FFCRA through March 31st, 2021. So this evening, I am requesting approval to extend both the paid sick leave and the expanded FMLA leave provisions of FFCRA through March 31st, 2021, with a retroactive effective date to January 1st, 2021 for any who might be able to recode leave that they had to take between this time. So that is my recommendation. Happy to answer any questions.
Chair Sutton, I'd make a motion to approve the extension of the FFCRA leave.
I had a motion by Mrs. Mahaffey and a second by Mr. Hegarty to approve staff's request to extend all of the provisions of FFCRA through March 31st, 2021. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor show by sign of aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Ayes have it. That request for extension is approved.
Thank you all.
Thanks, sir. Want to now go back and grab the item that we moved from consent to action, the YMCA of the Triangle Association Resource Center. Mr. Simmons, you're up, and this is looking for approval of the YMCA Triangle Association Support Center, the Community FAST program.
Correct. Good evening, Chair Sutton, board members, Superintendent. I believe this was pulled out to an action item so we could bring a little attention to it, and I'll be happy to do so. This particular item is this is a federal grant that is administered through the state through DPI. As stated, it's through the Y. They call them Scholastic Support Centers. We often in our conversations call them the Community FAST programs. They are one and the same. Some of the main points here I'm going to touch on real quickly so that folks get an understanding of how this grant money would be spent. It would be used to provide developmentally appropriate learning opportunities, including social emotional learning and physical activities. The provider, in this case the Y, will provide professional services for about 450 students, probably 450 plus. The more we talk with them, the more likely it is that that number is going to exceed 500. Between January and June, would provide academic support for students who need assistance with virtual learning or remote learning in a variety of settings. The point here is that it's quite flexible. So, well, obviously, as we have seen, we don't have the control that we would like over the effects that COVID has on our schedule. This particular program allows us to meet kids' needs almost regardless of where we end up with in the in-person versus remote discussion. Of course, it's to provide safe, supervised childcare for K-8 students. This would be consistent with a 1-to-10 ratio per classroom. So you'd be following the CDC and the DHHS guidelines, Wake County Health and Human Services guidelines, as well as some smaller but important items having to do with Wi-Fi and tech support for at-risk students who are engaged in remote learning, and making sure that the digital supports comply with FERPA and security agreements. I don't mean to suggest they're less in their importance. I mean that as contracts go, we're getting down into the details here. So the fiscal implications of this, the grant is a $350,000 grant, $330,000 of which would be used for the purposes that I just described here. I believe $20,000 of it is set aside for DPI to do the evaluation after the grant is completed. And what we are seeking here is board approval of this grant, contingent upon the receipt of the official grant award notification, which I believe came within the last hour or so, and final guidance from the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, subject to terms and conditions acceptable to the superintendent and the board attorney. So seeking your approval.
I make a motion to accept that.
Second.
We already had a motion on that. That's how we got to the discussion, didn't we? No? Okay. All right. Okay. Motion by Mrs. Cash and a second by Ms. Kushner to approve the grant for the YMCA Training Resource Center and the FAST program. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Kushner.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to appreciate highlighting our relationship with the Y, the success that we've had partnering with them, the great work they've done, socially, allowing us to have more social distance at that 1-to-10 ratio with the students that go to their centers. So thank you to the Y. And I appreciate Mr. Simmons highlighting this work.
Ms. Cash.
Yeah, in addition, thanks, Ms. Kushner. I agree. I would like to highlight that as well. They have done an excellent job of keeping our community engaged in our public schools. So it's not been an easy feat, so I appreciate their hard work.
All right, seeing no other questions, all those in favor of approving this grant contract, show by sign of aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Ayes have it. That grant is, I'm sure, eagerly and warmly approved. Yeah. Can I entertain a motion to approve the HR requests or recommendations from the superintendent?
Motion to approve the HR recommendations?
Got a motion by Dr. Martin, second by Mr. Hagerty, to approve the HR recommendations that were discussed early in closed session and that have been presented by the superintendent. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, show by sign of aye. Any opposed, nay. Ayes have it. May I entertain a motion to return to closed session for the items previously stated and that are on the agenda?
So moved.
Had a motion by Ms. Mahaffey and a second by Mr. Hagerty to return to closed session for the items previously stated and that are listed on the agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor show by a sign of aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. We now stand back in closed session. Thank you all for joining us for our meeting this evening, and good night.